All right, I want to welcome everybody. This is Marty Exline with the AT3 Center. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar on the Telecommunications Equipment Distribution Program. Of course, the EDPs are just one important research for folks to select and acquire assistive technology related to the telecommunications equipment that they might not otherwise be able to obtain. And I think everybody knows in some states, the programs are operated by the state AT programs, and in other states, the state assistive technology programs have close relationships with the, and collaborations with the equipment distribution programs. And so today we're going to hear from Sandy McNally of the Pennsylvania Tech Owl program. Sandy coordinates the EDP in Pennsylvania and is also the chair of the Telecommunications Equipment Distribution Program Association. And then we'll also hear from Stacy Brady of the Missouri Assistive Technology Program. And Stacy also coordinates the telephone equipment program in Missouri with Missouri Assistive Technology and is chair of the TED Policy Committee. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sandy and Stacy in a second. And they'll make time for questions and comments, and you can also use the chat box to enter any questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Marty. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sandy. So Marty gave just a little nutshell explanation of what an equipment distribution program is. So I'll just kind of review that. And I'll probably call it an EDP from time to time. State EDPs are programs that provide equipment, usually telephone equipment, to people with disabilities. And if you go to the next slide, Marty, thanks. If you hit the space bar, yeah. So little information, not every state has an equipment distribution program. I know that's shocking. For example, New York State does not have an equipment distribution program. There are approximately 48 EDPs throughout the states, and they're administered by, some are administered by state agencies like the Office for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, nonprofits, and state ATAC programs, among others. There is an organization called the Telecommunications Equipment Distribution Program Association, or TEDPA, and it is a member organization, so not all EDPs are members of TEDPA. However, on TEDPA's website, we do have information about the state EDPs that we are that are either members of TEDPA or not, just all the ones that we are aware of. So if you want to find your state program, you can go to the TEDPA website for that. So the next slide. I always like to say, if you've seen one EDP, you've seen one EDP. I think if you hit the space bar or the right arrow, it goes there. So I put the title up there. If you've seen one EDP, you've seen one EDP, because as we've gotten together over the years at conferences and talked about our programs, it's everybody you talk to seems to do something different. So there are different program types. There are loaner programs, which is the program distributes equipment for the recipient's use, but the state program retains ownership of the equipment. That means the equipment program is responsible for repairs, upgrades, replacements, exchanges and returns. So it's loaned to the recipient and they're responsible for returning it to the program if it is no longer needed or if they move out of state. So a couple big examples of states with loaner programs are Florida and California. There are others though. There's owner programs, which the equipment distributed belongs to the recipient. It becomes their property and they are responsible for it, and including repairs. Usually the equipment's purchased with at least a 1-year warranty. And also too, because the equipment is purchased with public funds, most programs, owner programs, inform recipients that they may not sell, pawn, or give away the equipment. What we do here in Pennsylvania, because we're an owner program, we have our equipment vendor put a sticker on the program, on the equipment before it goes out, and it says, if you no longer need this equipment, contact our program. And then when they do that, we see if we can get the equipment back and put it in our reuse program. Then there are voucher programs where eligible recipients receive a voucher for an amount based on the type of equipment they need. And then they take the voucher to one of the pre-approved vendors and exchange it for whatever device they need. The vendor then accepts that voucher as full payment. And then there's cost sharing, which happens, I think Maine is one of the states that does, it's a loaner program, but they also have a cost sharing option where eligible recipients pay a preset amount toward the purchase of the equipment, and then the program pays for the rest. And then there are combination programs with some of them do owner for one thing and loaner for one type of equipment and loaner for another type of equipment. And it gets really, really interesting. Some programs have an income requirement. Some do not. Most programs require some sort of verification or certification of disability. It could be part of the application, or if the agency that runs the equipment distribution program already serves them as a client or a consumer, they're already registered with that agency, then that's enough to qualify for the program. And then some programs require some sort of evaluation or trial of the device before they receive equipment. And some do not. Some make it the individual's choice. So that makes it interesting. And also the programs have different funding sources. So some programs are funded through a surcharge on phone lines and service lines. Some are funded through a line item in the general fund or on their budget, in the agency's budget. So it can depend. So also types of equipment distributed may depend on statute. So for example, some states can only distribute equipment that can be used with to access the relay services. So that would mean they can only distribute TTYs and voice carryover phones and things like that, and would not be permitted to distribute amplified telephones, for example. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I just alluded to the first bullet point on this types of equipment distributed. Depends on the program statute and policies. And then many programs now have been able to add wireless phones, tablets, and accessories. There are currently 18 TEDPA members who distribute wireless. We have 34 members or 35 members, and 18 programs distribute both wireline or landline and wireless. There are also interesting equipment because there are no true amplified wireless phones. So your cell phone, even though it may get really, really loud, technically it's not really an amplified phone unless it goes above, what is it, Stacy, 18 decibel?
Correct.
Yeah. So while if you have a typical range of hearing, that sounds really loud. But if you need amplification, usually we're looking for at least 35 to 40 decibels for a moderate hearing loss. So there are accessories that go with, that can be used with mobile phones that will help if you wear hearing aids, for example, and you turn on a T-coil in your hearing aid. It helps with the reception and you get a clearer sound from the cell phone, but it's really not amplified. There are cell phone amplifiers that are a Bluetooth device that connects to the cell phone. But there's also devices called what we call bridge phones. So these are wireline or landline desk phones that connect with Bluetooth to your mobile phone so that when you get a call on your mobile phone, you pick up the bridge phone handset and you can have an amplified phone call through that handset. So you don't pick up the mobile phone, you answer your mobile phone through the bridge phone. The nice thing about the bridge phone is, yeah, it's also an amplified phone for wireline or landline use. But if you happen to then drop your landline service, you can still use that phone to do amplified telephone calls. So because it's still connected to your cell phone. Are there any questions so far? Okay. All right, next slide. So I'm sure everybody's aware of all of this, but I'm just reviewing. There are telephone relay services that are federally mandated throughout all the states and territories. The relay provider, so that's the company that provides the captions or the communication assistant that's typing through the TTY back and forth or whatever. If it's speech to speech relay, they're revoicing or helping the person who's having speech difficulty. They charge the state to provide those services, but it's important to remember that there is no charge to the end user, the person who's using the relay. So even if I as a hearing person need to call somebody who uses a TTY and go through the 711 relay, there is no charge on my phone bill. There's no charge to me for using that service. So traditional relay, as we have come to call it, is TTYs, voice carryover phones, hearing carryover phones, and speech-to-speech relay. And I just have to say, I did an event a few years ago for mostly the people who attended were deaf, and I actually learned the sign for dinosaur at that event because I had a TTY on my table, and they pointed to it and did the sign for dinosaur. So yeah, they're right. It is a dinosaur. Then we have the caption telephones, which came along in the mid 90s or late 90s. So they get captions through the landline. The CapTel phone is the only one that actually does that through landline service. If you are making a call, all you have to do is pick up your phone and make a call. If somebody's calling you, however, they first have to dial a toll-free number and then enter your phone number so that the captions come through coming from them to the person who needs the caption. So that's kind of like, there are issues with that because of the captions don't really like digital phone lines much, and people's phone lines are changing sometimes without their knowledge from, there's now IPCTS telephone captioning, Internet Protocol Caption Telephone Service, that was mandated by the FCC in 2005. That still uses your landline for the voice part of your call, but the captions are coming through the internet. So it's not affected by digital phone lines because you're getting the captions through your internet connection. So I also want to note that in some states, the EDP is also administering the relay services. And also, on the flip side, some states, the relay provider is administering the equipment distribution program. So for example, Sprint, who is provides relay services, does administer the equipment distribution program in some states. Next slide. So what is next? We're always talking about the next best thing. More accessibility features on mobile devices. You've all heard about the Apple rollout of iOS 13 that has a lot more accessibility features, even more than they had before. Android has some, Google especially, has come up with some things that are coming out first on the Google Pixel 4 phone. Of course, it's their software, so they're going to roll it out on their phones first. I guess eventually it'll be apps for Android. So Google is coming out with live relay and live captions because they use what's called automatic speech recognition. Oh, I should have ASR. I still have a typo. I'm very sorry. I should say ASR, automatic speech recognition. I think I'm thinking of the annual progress report. I must have it on my mind. So ASR is a hot topic right now. That what the FCC is looking into, instead of having somebody in the middle who's revoicing what somebody is saying in order to produce captions, they're talking about bypassing that and just having automatic speech recognition going through and doing the captions. I think if those of you who attended the other webinar about the Caption Mate, that's basically using ASR. Okay, are there any questions for me before I turn it over to Stacy?
Sandy, it's Stacy. And do you want to talk a little bit, while it's not equipment, do you want to talk a little bit about, sometimes it's not about the equipment, it's just getting them matched up with the right type of relay? Some of the other relays that use technology?
Yeah, sure. So, sometimes people think that, well, I can speak to, sometimes people think that they need a captioned phone, and they come into the equipment distribution program or contact us and they say, I want the phone that does the words. I saw it on television. And they test out phones first and they end up getting an amplified phone. sometimes people think that they need to use a TTY when really what they need to use is maybe hearing carryover relay, which doesn't require, it requires you typing, but you can hear. So if you just have a TTY, you're not going to get any sound. So there are phones that do produce sound and allow you to type your response. There are some devices, because the companies, because landlines are going away and dwindling, companies are not putting any research and development into newer versions of these like voice carryover phones or TTYs. Like for example, there used to be a TTY that had a large visual display for people who had low vision, and that has been out of production for a couple of years now. And so if the person can't use captions because they need to type their response back, there's really not that much of an option for them, except for something online. There are devices now in the works, I believe, that are going to be available for real-time text using something other than a wireless phone. Stacy, did you want to add anything?
IP relay is also another resource where you're using a computer or even a tablet to make a call, which has been great for speech users who've kind of felt left out over the years.
Yes, and there are add-on devices for people with wireline. I know that there's a device that hooks up to an iPad so that your speech app or your text will go through. It hooks up to your landline so that you can make a call and converse directly through the iPad. The IP relay is usage is really on the downswing, and speech-to-speech relay seems to be the forgotten relay service that I know there are some relay providers that are really pushing it forward, but in their outreach efforts, it won't be too long though before automatic speech recognition will pick up some of that too, because I know Google has a program they're working on called Project Euphonia, where they're collecting voice samples from people who have different speech patterns, such as from disability or stroke or accents, and they're adding those samples to their automatic speech recognition software, so that it eventually somebody who, and I don't know how far this is in the future, but eventually somebody who would have been a speech-to-speech relay client may be able to use automatic speech recognition with projects like Project Euphonia, if enough people participate to get enough samples. Okay, so if there's no questions for me, I'll turn things over to Stacy.
All right. Thank you, Marty. Thank you. So the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program, and it's a mouthful of letters, NDBEDP. Even looking at it, it's very difficult to slip out. But the great thing is they've changed that. So the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program, it's federally funded. It came about under the 21st Century Communication and Visual Accessibility Act, also known as the CVAA, and that's likely how I will continue to refer to it. But under the Obama administration in 2010, it created a number of programs, including the National Deafblind, which we now formally call I Can Connect, or ICC. And $10 million is annually distributed across the states and territories at a variety of amounts. And if you'll change the slide, please. The funds can be used for outreach as well as for states to administer assessments, evaluations, equipment training of the program. But it all began in July 1st of 2012 as a pilot and ran for 5 years. And on June 30th of 2017, that pilot ended and became a permanent program the following day of July 1st, 2017. So in order for states to even consider being a part of this, they had to put in an application with the FCC during both the pilot portion and the permanent program. And during that time, a number of states who had applied fell by the wayside for whatever purpose, and a lot of states were picked up by Perkins to administer the program. Now, a number of states, which was an increase, I believe, last year, 13 states now administer the ICANN Connect program for their state, while the remainder states and territories are by some other organizations or agencies, including Perkins, Helen Keller, and Illinois and Kentucky, I think, just had new administration take over. But if you'll change the slide, please. Excuse me. The ICANN Connect program assists individuals who have both a hearing and vision loss that meets not only the Helen Keller definition of deafblind, but functional limitations. And the FCC has been very concerned with making sure it's not just the vision and the hearing loss, but those functional limitations, so that the individuals who are most needing assistance to equipment that they've not been able to have are getting served first. There are income restrictions. And at the end of this presentation, there's a resource slide with what each state has, or excuse me, I'm sorry. There is a link to the income restrictions. The FCC also made it very clear that it has to be for distance communications. If it is meant for face-to-face communications or anything other than distance communications, they are likely not to approve that. So they're looking at calling, texting, emailing, accessing the internet, video chatting, social media, some way to get that individual where they are not socially isolated. And the individual must be able to use equipment and or be trained to use the equipment. Now that sounds pretty harsh, excuse me, but there have been instances where an individual could not recognize the individual they were speaking with. And I don't mean that they didn't know their voice or they didn't know their, by sight. I mean, they could not functionally explain or tell you who that individual was on a daily basis in any way, shape, or form. There was no cognitive recognition. And so, again, it sounds like a harsh statement, but the FCC wants to ensure individuals are not just letting that equipment sit there, especially when states have so little funding to provide equipment to as many individuals who need it. Next slide, please. So let's go back and revisit what is deafblind, and then I'll talk about the part that most people forget about. So obviously it's a visual acuity of 20/200 or less in the better eye with corrective lenses. A field effect such as peripheral diameter or visual field subtends an angular distance no greater than 20 degrees. A progressive visual loss with prognosis leading to one or both of the above conditions. And then the hearing guidelines has to be a chronic hearing disability so severe that most speech cannot be understood with optimum amplification and progressive hearing loss leading to a prognosis of the above condition. And what most people forget, and what we find with a lot of seniors, is the progressive aspect. And so where our seniors who often have macular degeneration and wear bilateral hearing aids that is continuing to get worse, they'll deny that they're having these issues, but as you delve deeper into their vision and their hearing loss, you find out they really do meet those qualifications for deafblind. And so a lot of these individuals who are working with these folks who are in deafblind are really having to just find ways to draw that information out of individuals because they all think it's age-related and all this is normal when it's really not the case. So next page, please. Now, while this is not a comprehensive list, there's a variety of technology available, including the adaptive telephones that Sandy just previously discussed, neck loops wired and Bluetooth, adaptive keyboards, screen reading software magnification, tablets and smartphones, computers, large screen monitors, cell phone amplifiers, signalers, and the signalers can be for a house phone, a cell phone, a video phone, and several of the signalers will also work to notify somebody if they have a text or an email, which has really made the world open up more. Refreshable braille displays, braille, CapTel, and other items with approval. And a lot of these states do talk with the FCC regularly just to ensure that they're administering the program as indicated and expected by the FCC. Next screen, please. When you're out, you're out. So as we mentioned previously, the iCan Connect program has a limited amount of funds that can be obtained, and it is getting harder and harder annually for reallocation of funds. So if you've overspent your allotted amount, you may not have more, and you may have to put your program on hold. So there's several ways around that to make the dollars stretch better. If equipment can be obtained through other sources, use it first. And some of the sources, as we all know, are AT programs, who may not only have equipment, but may have access to other resources. EDPs, as Sandy mentioned, we have access to a lot of telephone equipment that may be available to other consumers. And some of these are internet accessible and some of them are not. It just varies on the state and the program and what their legislative statutes allow. Reusing, refurbishing, and recycling equipment for ICC or other users, and cost sharing. Maybe VR will provide the training if ICC provides the equipment. And I mention it in that order because if the other program, say VR, provides the equipment, ICC cannot provide the training. The equipment has to be provided by ICC in order for training to be paid for through the deafblind program. And Sandy, were you on that call yesterday? Or last week, excuse me?
I was not able to be on the call, but I did read the transcript.
And that's exactly what they were talking about, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, the question did come up about that. Yeah.
So it's a matter of how to corroborate those different groups to work collectively to help that individual in the end. Next slide, please. So out of that $10 million, in the first 5 years of the pilot, the FCC allowed $250,000 for outreach. But in 2017, under the permanent rules, they reduced that cost down to $150,000 annually. And that allowed initially for programs in states and the FCC to get the news out that iCan Connect exists. And they were doing a number of unique ways of marketing, including billboards. They set up a website. They have done some PSAs, flyers and booths at various events. And they do provide some marketing materials to the states. But one of the biggest several of the biggest ways that they've been reaching out includes Facebook and drawing people to their website. Pardon me. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. We're at our resources page with links for the 21st Century Communications Video Accessibility Act, the website for ICANN Connect, the income guidelines, and how to find your state for ICANN Connect. So with that, do we have any questions?
Stacy, this is Sandy.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the state AT programs that are running either the EDP or administering ICANN Connect as their state financing activity. So we do collect data. We do collect how many devices we distribute, and we collect the value. So it's similar to just any other distribution of equipment. The data is very similar. We do in Pennsylvania, I can only speak for Pennsylvania right now, we collect satisfaction and performance measures on our equipment distribution program. But we have a challenge with ICANN Connect in that we haven't had much success in getting responses back from people for performance measures and satisfaction. As far as administrative costs, we have in Pennsylvania have had to supplement the administrative cost for running our state landline EDP throughout the years with some of our federal AT Act dollars. We have just a set amount given to us by on that program for administrating the program, and it's not enough to cover our actual costs. We took the program over in 2007, and we have not had an increase in our administrative allocation since then. And as far as ICANN Connect goes, Stacy mentioned every state and territory has an allocation. I don't know what the formula is. I think it's based on population, but it's very interesting, the allocation amounts for some of the programs, but there is a cap. There's a caps on how much you can spend of your allocation on outreach, how much you can spend on admin, and the overall cap for the permanent program for administrative costs is 15% of your allocation, your total allocation, which isn't that great. So we do have to supplement what we spend because, as you might imagine, the administration of ICANN Connect is very, very heavy on staff having to contact people, having to follow up with applications, having to get in touch with consultants and have them schedule, and all the paperwork that's involved in just administering the program, not to mention ordering equipment, etc. It is, at least it's better than during the pilot when we could only do 15% admin costs based on the amount we spent on direct service to clients. That really was challenging. I just wanted to make sure I talked a little bit about that.
Great, thank you, Sandy.
And if anybody has any questions, Amy Goldman did mention that there was a webinar, one of the vendor webinars that are part of the device loan and device demonstration community to practice was on the CaptionMate a couple of weeks ago. So that webinar is available on the AT3 Center website. And I don't know if you can see Kathy Adams from Main Site asks about whether the FCC has an annual data collection requirement
Mhm.
similar to the AT data that we report to the Administration for Community Living.
Uh, Great question, Kathy. This is Sandy. They sure do. It's actually every 6 months there is a report that's due, and the FCC is actually when the permanent program came about, the FCC part of the rules of the permanent program was that they were going to develop a national reporting database because there, long story short, there was a database that some states are using, but most of us abandoned it because it was not very usable. So we do our own tracking and submit our reports on the form that we have to submit reports on, and it's very time consuming. So supposedly the database, when it's done, will just be able to plug in our numbers and generate the report for us. But they are asking for a lot more data than we report on for the AT Act. They ask us for serial numbers. They ask us for names and addresses of people. They ask us who certified their disability. They ask us what equipment they got. It's really what I would call granular data, and a lot of us have expressed frustration with that to the FCC, stating things like, "Well, we run a federal program, and we're never asked for people's names." So, yeah, it's a lot of reporting.
This is Stacy, and part of that too, and part of why they're doing the database the way they are, is individuals moving between states. And, you know, what kind of equipment did they get in one state that they couldn't take it to their other state with them? Because they own, for the most part, they own the equipment. There are exceptions to that rule. But they didn't, okay, I happen to be near Kansas City, and it's not unusual for people to flip back and forth between Kansas and Missouri. And they just want to make sure also that individuals aren't abusing the program and just going between states and getting different types of equipment. And if they are getting different types of equipment, why are they getting different types of equipment?
Right.
And Amy Goldman's asking, does the lead for the I Can't Connect program come up for rebid at all? Is there still turnover in who is the lead? And if there's any tips on applying if there is turnover in your state?
Yeah, this is Sandy. With the permanent program, everybody who's the certifying entity, and that's their term for it, the FCC's term for it, has to reapply every 5 years. But for various reasons, there have been programs that have dropped the administration because they can't afford to do it. So the FCC puts the announcement out that it's up for bid. And I know in the past, I've offered people like our application so that they could kind of use that as a guideline. It seems like the turnaround time has been really short lately on those applications, like 2 to 3 weeks. And so what we've been seeing is they get kind of snapped up by Perkins or Helen Keller National Center. But yeah, they do. I mean, if you're so inclined, you can sign up to the Access on the FCC site, you can sign up for the announcements that come out. And we certainly pass them along when we see them, because we'd like some of our fellow ATAC programs to apply. And I know some of them have and have been unsuccessful for whatever reason, but I think, as Stacy said, Kentucky and Illinois were just two recent ones. It seems to have settled down a little bit. There was a little flurry during the pilot. There was quite a bit of shifting. And then when the program became permanent, we all had to reapply. Even if we had been the administrator for the pilot, all the programs had to reapply to be the administrator for the permanent program. And then there were some changes there too, because some people decided not to reapply.
Correct. This is Stacy. The other unique thing that happened between the pilot and the permanent program is how various states worked collaboratively with other agencies. So while the state may be administering parts of the service, they may be relying on a different program to provide the final parts of the organization. So we've seen where the state program is administered by maybe the nonprofit, and then they delegate certain functions out to maybe Perkins.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, there's kind of some division going on of the work.
This is Stacy again. One other thing that has been interesting, and unfortunately due to the cost as well, TEDA has had meetings of the state programs who administer ICANN Connect, and it's been very enlightening, and it's nice to have those states who are administering it get together in a format where they can talk openly and freely about what's going on and some things that they've experienced over the years or in the past year, or a hard situation that they're trying to figure out. Excuse me. So Sandy and I have sat in on those meetings quite a bit. I'm so sorry. I have allergies and they've settled in my chest. So I'm sorry. So anyway, it's been very enlightening what we've learned in those meetings where we aren't necessarily able to voice that in the open monthly meetings that the ICANN Connect offices or administrators are typically on.
Yeah, this is Sandy. When the program was a pilot, I know a few of us used to get together over lunch at the AT annual meetings to talk about the program and speak frankly. And that was nice. The reason for this is because there's no funding in the program that allows us to have a conference or a national meeting. All the funds, except for, well, they want as much of the funding that the states receive to go towards the people. And that's, a good thing. It just makes it challenging for programs to share information and tips and, the kind of conversations like we have in our annual meetings.
Anybody else have any questions they want to put in chat, or go ahead and unmute yourself, voice? Well, if not, I want to thank Sandy and Stacy both. We'll go ahead and we will announce when the recordings are available for folks if you have other staff that were interested but weren't able to to make the webinar, then we'll go ahead and announce when the recordings are available for the webinar. And if there isn't anything else, then thank you everybody for participating, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.